When I saw my husband flipping through my phone, my heart skipped, not from the fear of being caught, but from the thought that he might see those messages. The ones I had forgotten to delete. I tried to snatch the phone from his hands, but he skillfully pulled it back and continued reading. I watched his face as it shifted with each line, feeling my life crumble in seconds. Yes, now he would know the truth. But not the whole truth. His hands trembled as he turned the pages, and I knew this was the moment when he would come across the message that would destroy everything. The one message that would explain it all and put a bold, final mark on everything. Or maybe it would only make things more confusing. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in his hands, and a new notification popped up on the screen. I saw his face pale as he read the sender's name. My husband froze. Not even blinking. I bit the inside of my cheek, an old habit when I'm nervous. My nerves mixed with the terror of knowing what I had done. His breathing quickened. I heard it even from 2 meters away. This was exactly what I had feared the most. Because 3 months ago, I made a mistake, the mistake that changed everything forever, and now I didn't know what to do. But let me tell you how it all happened. Before I share the secret I've been hiding for so long, comment below where you're watching this from, and tell me, have you ever had a secret you tried to keep hidden but ultimately failed? The evening had settled into its usual rhythm. The house was quiet, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing by outside. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a cardigan, my hands nervously fidgeting with the hem. My husband had been in the study all evening, working on his projects, as he often did. His back turned to me, his focus consumed by whatever task he had set for himself. I didn't mind. I never minded the quiet. But tonight felt different. A sense of discomfort had settled in my chest, a tightness I couldn't shake off. I wasn't sure if it was the age creeping up on me or just the slow erosion of something I had failed to notice until now, but I could feel the space between us growing. Not in a dramatic way, but in those small, unnoticed ways that build up over time. He no longer kissed me in the mornings before work. He stopped noticing when I wore something new. The touch, the warmth, the little moments that used to tie us together, those had all slowly faded. And yet, I found myself wanting to be noticed more than ever. Perhaps that's why, when he mentioned his nephew would be staying with us for a while, I didn't think much of it. It was just another name on a list of people who came and went. But when I saw him for the first time, something inside me stirred, an unfamiliar, unexpected flutter that I quickly dismissed. I had my life, my responsibilities. I had no room for distractions. But the sensation wouldn't go away. I'd been married for years, content, mostly. There were no major fights, no broken promises. But there were silences. Long, drawn-out silences. In the past, we'd always found ways to fill the quiet, laughter, stories, even simple gestures. But lately, the quiet felt suffocating. And with his nephew now living under our roof, I couldn't help but notice how differently he carried himself. His youth, his energy, it was all so alive. The way he moved, the way he spoke. There was a lightness in him that I hadn't realized I missed. A lightness I had lost somewhere along the way. The first evening we spent together felt strange. He was kind, polite, but there was an undertone between us, an awareness that lingered in the air, unspoken but palpable. His presence was magnetic, and I found myself more aware of my own behavior, my own thoughts, than I had ever been before. When he smiled at me, I felt something shift inside, like a current I couldn't control. It wasn't just the way he smiled, it was the way he looked at me, as if he saw something in me that I had forgotten existed. It made me uncomfortable, but at the same time, it was the first time in months that I felt alive. It was a strange, unsettling sensation. I should have brushed it off, laughed it off, told myself it was just a momentary lapse. But I didn't. I couldn't. Days passed, and I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he moved around the house, the way his laughter filled the empty spaces. It was as if the house had come to life again. I found myself looking for reasons to be in the same room as him. Small, insignificant moments, like when he asked for a glass of water, or when he asked me to help him with something in the kitchen. It wasn't the tasks that mattered, it was the proximity. The closeness. The brief moments of interaction that made my heart race in ways it hadn't in years. And yet, despite the growing tension, I kept telling myself that I was imagining things. This couldn't be happening. I had a life. A family. A husband. I wasn't some young woman looking for excitement. But even as I told myself that, I knew it wasn't true. I knew there was something there, something between us, that I couldn't ignore. One evening, when my husband was busy in his study, I found myself sitting with the nephew in the living room, the television playing quietly in the background. Our conversation was casual, at first. We spoke about the usual things, work, family, the weather. But slowly, the conversation began to change. His eyes, so steady and warm, held mine longer than I expected. The silence stretched between us, comfortable but heavy. My pulse quickened. I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks, the sudden awareness of him in a way I hadn't felt before. Then, as if guided by some unspoken force, he leaned in slightly. My breath hitched in my throat, and my mind screamed for me to pull away, to stop this before it went any further. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was something about him, something that made my heart ache, something I couldn't explain. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "You're not like the others." The words lingered in the air, charged with meaning, and I didn't know what to say. I wanted to pull back, but my body betrayed me. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I only looked at him, my eyes filled with a mix of confusion and longing. He tilted his head, studying me. I could see the conflict in his eyes. He knew what was happening, but he didn't speak it aloud. Neither did I. I couldn't. And then, as if drawn by some invisible force, our faces were closer, and before I could stop myself, our lips met. It was a soft, tentative kiss, quick, almost fleeting. But it felt like the entire world shifted in that instant. We kissed. And just like that, everything changed. I pulled away quickly, my heart pounding in my chest. My breath was shallow, my thoughts scattered. What had I done? What was happening? I couldn't understand it, couldn't justify it. But there was no turning back now. As I sat there, stunned and speechless, I realized that everything I thought I knew about myself, about my life, had just been thrown into chaos. There was no going back from this. I had crossed a line, and I didn't know how to live with the consequences. All I knew was that I had to make a choice, one that would change everything. The air between us felt charged in a way I couldn't fully comprehend. The kiss lingered in my mind like a soft echo, and I couldn't quite understand what had happened or what it meant. I felt a rush of guilt flood my chest, and at the same time, an undeniable pull that I couldn't ignore. It was as if some invisible thread had wrapped itself around us, binding us together, and I found myself unable to break free. I sat there, my heart racing, unable to speak or move. My hands were trembling, and the taste of his lips still lingered on mine, a reminder of something forbidden, something I had never allowed myself to consider. What had I done? What had we done? He didn't say anything either. The room was heavy with the silence between us, thick with the weight of the moment. Neither of us moved, both of us caught in this shared understanding that what had just occurred had changed something fundamental, something irreversible. I could feel his presence beside me, his warmth still radiating, and I felt a strange mix of fear and desire. Fear, because I knew I had crossed a line that I could never uncross. Desire, because there was something about the way he looked at me, something that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't felt in years. His gaze was intense, yet uncertain, as if he, too, was grappling with the enormity of what had just happened. I could feel my breath quicken, and I couldn't stop the thoughts that swirled in my mind, each one more confusing than the last. I had been with my husband for decades, and we had shared a life together, filled with memories and moments. But now, it felt as if everything had shifted. As if I had suddenly awakened from a long, foggy dream and realized that I had been missing something all along. I glanced over at him, and he met my eyes. The tension was unbearable, yet neither of us spoke. There was no need for words, not yet. It was as if we both knew that saying anything would only complicate things further. We were already in too deep. The silence stretched on, and I tried to gather my thoughts, but the more I tried to think, the more jumbled everything became. My mind was spinning, my emotions a whirlwind of confusion, guilt, and something else. Something I couldn't name, something I didn't want to acknowledge, but knew was there. Finally, it was he who broke the silence. I didn't mean for that to happen, he said quietly, his voice low and unsure. He sounded almost apologetic, as if he were trying to undo what had just occurred. I nodded slowly, my eyes still fixed on him. I couldn't find the words to respond. What could I say? How could I explain what I was feeling, when I didn't even understand it myself? He looked down at his hands, as if trying to make sense of his own thoughts. I watched him, unsure of what to do next. Part of me wanted to say something, to ease the tension that hung between us, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. The words felt trapped in my throat, as if my body had forgotten how to function properly after that kiss. For a moment, neither of us moved. The house felt too quiet, too still, and I realized that this was the calm before the storm. Everything was about to change, and there was no turning back. I stood up abruptly, needing space, needing to move. I couldn't stay in that room any longer, not with him sitting there, not with that kiss still hanging in the air like a weight on my chest. I needed to think, to clear my head, but all I could hear were the echoes of his lips on mine, the sensation still fresh and vivid. I need some time, I whispered, more to myself than to him. I turned and walked towards the door, my steps unsteady, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached for the door handle, I felt his gaze on me, his eyes following my every move. But I couldn't look at him again. I couldn't face what we had just done. I couldn't face the truth of what was happening, of what had already begun. The door clicked behind me, and I was alone. But even in that solitude, I couldn't escape the memory of his touch, the way he had made me feel. I knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. I walked through the empty house, my mind a jumble of conflicting emotions. The house, which had always felt like a safe haven, now felt alien. The walls, the furniture, the familiar rooms, they all seemed foreign, as if everything had shifted in a single moment, leaving me adrift in a sea of uncertainty. I couldn't stay in the living room. I couldn't stay in the house. My heart was beating too fast, my thoughts too scattered. I needed to get away, to breathe, to be somewhere that didn't feel like the setting of a terrible mistake. I grabbed my coat and slipped out the door, feeling the cool evening air rush over me. It was a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I had just left behind. I walked aimlessly, not really caring where I was going, just needing to move. The streets were quiet, the only sound the rhythmic echo of my footsteps on the pavement. I don't know how long I walked, but eventually, I found myself in the park. It was empty, the benches deserted, the trees standing tall and silent against the darkening sky. I sat down on a bench, staring out at the empty paths, feeling the cold seep into my bones. My mind was still reeling from what had happened. The kiss. His eyes. The way I had felt in that moment. It was all too much. I closed my eyes, trying to calm my racing heart, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw him. I saw the way he looked at me, the way his lips had brushed against mine. I felt it all over again, and it made me dizzy. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. This couldn't be real. I couldn't be feeling this way. I was married. I had a life, a history, a family. This was just a fleeting moment, a mistake. A mistake that would never happen again. I had to believe that, didn't I? But even as I thought those words, I knew deep down that it was too late. Things had already changed. The line had been crossed. And there was no going back. I stood up from the bench, my mind still spinning. I had no idea what I was supposed to do now. I had no idea what I was supposed to feel. I only knew that my life, the one I thought I knew so well, was now unraveling before me. And I didn't know how to stop it. As I walked back home, the weight of my thoughts felt unbearable. I couldn't escape them. I couldn't ignore the truth. Something had happened, something that I could never undo. I arrived back at the house, the door clicking shut behind me. I took a deep breath before stepping inside, trying to calm the storm inside me. My husband was still in his study, his presence filling the house in a way that felt both comforting and foreign. I hesitated before walking up the stairs. My thoughts were a whirlwind, my body aching with the desire to run from everything. But I couldn't run. Not anymore. I reached the top of the stairs and stood there for a moment, my heart heavy. I had to face this. I had to figure out what I was going to do. But as I stood there, staring into the hallway, all I could think about was the kiss. The mistake. And the secret I would now carry for the rest of my life. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all pressing down on me. How had I gotten here? And where was I going now? I spent the entire night pacing back and forth in my bedroom, unable to settle. The bed felt too big, too empty without my husband beside me, even though we had hardly spoken to each other for weeks now. His quiet presence, his familiar routine, had been the only comfort I'd known for so long, and yet, in that moment, it felt distant. Everything felt distant. It wasn't just him. It was me. I felt like I had somehow become a stranger in my own life, and I didn't know how to find my way back. The memory of the kiss lingered in my mind, like a soft whisper, always just behind my thoughts. Every time I tried to focus on something else, anything else, his face would flash in my mind. The way his eyes had locked with mine, the warmth of his lips against mine, the sensation that had rushed through me when I realized that I hadn't pulled away. That kiss had been a line crossed, and I was now standing on the other side, unsure of where I belonged. I could still feel it, the weight of my decision, the enormity of the consequences. But there was something else too, something I hadn't been ready to acknowledge before. It was a question I kept asking myself over and over: why did it happen? Why did I let it happen? Was it just a momentary lapse? A fleeting weakness? Or was there something deeper beneath the surface, something I had been avoiding for years? I had been married for so long, and yet I felt as though I had forgotten how to truly feel. I had neglected my own desires, my own needs, in favor of maintaining a semblance of stability. But when he had come into the house, everything had changed. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, it was the way he made me feel. Alive. Seen. In a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. The guilt gnawed at me, and I knew I couldn't escape it. But I couldn't escape him either. He was always there now, lingering in the background of my thoughts. I didn't know what to do with myself, let alone what to do with him. I couldn't go back to what had been, and yet I couldn't fully embrace what was now before me. It felt like I was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into an abyss, not knowing if I should leap or retreat. The morning came far too soon. I hadn't slept a wink, but the exhaustion I felt was nothing compared to the turmoil inside me. I glanced at the clock on my nightstand, almost 7 in the morning. My husband would be waking up soon. He had no idea what had transpired the night before, no inkling of the storm that was raging inside me. And yet, as I heard his footsteps moving down the hallway, I couldn't help but wonder if he could somehow sense the change in me. Could he feel it? Could he hear it in the silence that stretched between us? I dragged myself out of bed and walked to the bathroom. My reflection in the mirror felt like a stranger. My face, pale from the lack of sleep, my eyes red-rimmed, betrayed the chaos inside me. I didn't recognize the woman looking back at me. She was someone else. Someone who had just crossed a line she didn't know how to uncross. I splashed cold water on my face, trying to shake off the heaviness, but it wouldn't go away. It was like a fog, clouding everything I did, every decision I made. I had to face it. I had to face the fact that my actions had consequences. I couldn't undo the kiss. I couldn't take it back. And I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I walked back into the bedroom, and my eyes instinctively fell on my husband's side of the bed. The sheets were still rumpled from the night before, his pillow slightly indented from his sleep. It all looked so normal. So mundane. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like a lie. Like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. As I stood there, trying to steady my thoughts, I heard him stir from the other room. I couldn't face him yet. Not now. I needed space, I needed time to figure out what I was going to do. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, staring at the screen. There were messages from him, my husband, and I could feel the weight of each word. He had no idea what had transpired. He had no idea about the changes inside me. But soon, he would. I felt a knot form in my stomach as I unlocked the phone and read his messages. "How's everything going? Let me know if you need anything." His words were innocent enough, but they felt like a blade twisting inside me. How could I go on living this double life? How could I continue pretending everything was fine when it wasn't? How could I look him in the eye and tell him I loved him when the truth was that something inside me had already shifted? I put the phone down, too tired to even respond. It wasn't that I didn't want to talk to him, it was that I didn't know what to say. And deep down, I didn't think he would understand. He wouldn't understand the turmoil I was in, the guilt, the confusion. And worst of all, he wouldn't understand the part of me that had been awakened by someone else. I glanced at the clock again. It was almost 8 now, and I could hear him moving around downstairs. He was getting ready for work, just like he always did. But today, it felt different. Today, nothing felt right. The house, the air, everything felt off. I didn't know how to go on with the day, how to face him, how to face myself. The sound of his footsteps grew louder as he approached the stairs. I turned away from the door, unsure of what to do next. I couldn't just stand here. I couldn't keep hiding from the truth, but I also couldn't confront it head-on. Not yet. I walked down the hallway, my footsteps slow and deliberate. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw him at the bottom, his back to me. He was adjusting his tie, his movements precise, almost mechanical. It was a scene I had seen countless times before. And yet, in that moment, it felt like I was seeing him for the first time. Not as my husband, not as the man I had spent so many years with, but as someone who had no idea what was happening inside me. I hesitated for a moment, then slowly descended the stairs. I wasn't ready to face him, but I had to. The silence between us was suffocating, and I couldn't avoid it forever. He turned as I reached the bottom, and for a brief moment, our eyes met. I couldn't read his expression. It was too neutral, too unreadable. But I could feel the weight of the unspoken words between us. The tension, the fear, the guilt. It was all there, hanging in the air like a dark cloud. "Good morning," I said, my voice quiet, almost hoarse. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Morning," he replied, his tone just as flat as mine. I wanted to say something, to explain, to tell him the truth. But I couldn't. The words felt stuck in my throat, unwilling to come out. How could I say what had happened? How could I explain the mess I had created? And so, I said nothing. The days that followed felt like I was living in two separate worlds, each more distant and unfamiliar than the last. My husband's routine, the predictable hum of our everyday life, continued as if nothing had changed. He went to work, had his meetings, and returned home at the usual hour. He greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, asked about my day, and I responded with the same rehearsed answers I had always given. But nothing was the same. Not for me. Not anymore. I couldn't even look at him without feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me. The kiss, that moment of madness, lingered like a shadow. Every time I saw his face, I was reminded of the distance between us, of how far I had wandered from the woman he had once known. I could almost feel the fracture deep within me, the space that had been filled with something I couldn't control, something I wasn't sure I wanted to. The house felt strangely empty even though he was there. The silence was deafening, filled with unsaid things, unasked questions, things neither of us dared to address. I had tried to push it all away, to return to the routine I knew, but the truth was that nothing would ever be the same again. Not after what I had done. I began to avoid him. It wasn't intentional, it was simply easier to be distant, to remain in the quiet spaces of the house where I wouldn't have to confront the truth. I spent hours in the kitchen, pretending to busy myself with cooking, cleaning, doing anything to keep my hands occupied. But no matter how much I cleaned or how many meals I prepared, the mess inside me wouldn't go away. I would find myself staring at the sink, my mind wandering to the moment that had changed everything. And each time, I felt the same tightening in my chest, the suffocating realization that I couldn't undo it. I avoided looking at the spot on the couch where we had kissed. I couldn't bring myself to sit there anymore. It felt like it held a piece of my guilt, a reminder that I had crossed a line that had never been meant to be crossed. There were moments, fleeting moments, when I would forget. When the house would feel like it used to, when the hum of our life together would almost feel normal again. But then, like clockwork, it would hit me. The weight of the secret, the guilt, the confusion. I would remember him. I would remember the way his eyes had looked at me, and everything would come rushing back in a flood of emotions I didn't know how to handle. I found myself retreating into silence, both physically and emotionally. The conversation with my husband became strained. I couldn't bring myself to talk to him the way I used to. I couldn't laugh at his jokes or engage in the small talk that had once come so naturally. It was like there was a wall between us, invisible but solid. And I didn't know how to break it down. One evening, a week after everything had happened, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. My husband had gone to bed, and the house was quiet. It was just me, the silence, and the ever-present thought of what I had done. I couldn't stop thinking about him, the nephew. The way he had looked at me, the way he had touched me, the way my body had reacted. I hated myself for feeling this way. I had no right. I was married, I had a family. And yet, here I was, consumed by something I couldn't explain. The phone buzzed in my hand, breaking my thoughts. I looked at the screen, my heart stopping when I saw the name. It was a message from him. I stared at the screen for a long moment before I finally opened it. The words were simple, almost innocent, but they sent a chill down my spine. "Are you okay?" I felt my breath catch in my throat as I read the message again. I wasn't sure how to respond. I wasn't sure what I even felt anymore. But I knew one thing for sure, I couldn't ignore him. Not after everything. Not after what had happened. I quickly typed out a response, my fingers trembling as I did. I'm fine. It was a lie, but it was the only thing I could say. The only thing I could offer. I didn't know how to explain the mess I was in. I didn't know how to explain the confusion that was tearing me apart. I didn't know how to explain the way my body betrayed me, how it responded to him even though I knew I shouldn't feel anything at all. I pressed send and stared at the screen, waiting for his reply. But it didn't come. Not right away. I set the phone down on the table and buried my face in my hands. The weight of everything was unbearable. I was suffocating under the pressure of the secret, of the lies I had told myself, of the life I had built with someone who had no idea what was really going on inside me. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to see my husband standing in the doorway. His face was tired, his eyes searching mine as if he could sense something was wrong. I tried to smile, to give him the reassurance he needed, but it felt hollow. My smile was a mask, a cover for the turmoil raging inside me. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. He had been asking this question a lot lately, and each time I had answered with the same lie. But this time, I wasn't sure if I could keep pretending. "I'm fine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he came over and sat down beside me at the table. The familiar warmth of his presence, the steady, reassuring rhythm of his breath, should have comforted me. But it didn't. Not anymore. I glanced at him, trying to gauge his mood, to figure out if he knew. Could he sense that something had changed? Could he feel the distance between us, even though it was invisible? He looked at me, his brow furrowed in concern, and I realized in that moment how much I had taken him for granted. How much I had allowed the distance between us to grow without even noticing. "I'm sorry," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "I don't know what's happening to me." He looked at me with a softness in his eyes that made my chest ache. "We'll figure it out," he said gently, reaching out to take my hand. "You don't have to go through this alone." But I did. I was already alone. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bring myself to share the truth with him. I couldn't bring myself to tell him that I had already crossed a line, that I had already betrayed him in a way that was impossible to undo. And as we sat there, my husband's hand in mine, I realized that no matter what I did, no matter how many times I said the words "I'm fine," I wasn't. Not anymore. I wasn't fine. I was lost. The days blurred together in a haze of confusion and guilt. I could feel it tightening around me like an invisible noose, squeezing the air from my lungs. My life felt like a house of cards, teetering on the edge of collapse, and I had no idea how to stop it. Every time I looked at my husband, I felt the weight of the lie pressing down on me. Every time I passed the door to my nephew's room, I could almost hear the unspoken tension between us, the words left unsaid, the feelings neither of us dared to confront. I had tried to go back to the way things were, tried to pretend that nothing had changed, but the truth was that nothing would ever be the same. I couldn't go back to that woman who had been content in her marriage, secure in her role as a wife. She didn't exist anymore. What was left was a woman torn between two worlds, the familiar, safe world of her marriage, and the unknown, dangerous territory that her feelings for her nephew had pulled her into. The house felt empty without my husband's presence. Even though he was there, physically, it was as though he wasn't really with me. The conversations we had were shallow, polite, but they lacked substance. I could tell he was trying to reach me, trying to connect, but I was slipping further and further away. I wanted to reach out, to hold on to him, but every time I tried, I felt this pull in the opposite direction, toward the one thing I knew I shouldn't want, but couldn't stop thinking about. The silence in the house was deafening, broken only by the sound of the clock ticking on the wall, each second stretching out longer than the last. I found myself caught between guilt and desire, between the life I had built and the life that was tempting me with something new, something forbidden. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop. The moment we had shared, the kiss, had been nothing more than a spark. But that spark had turned into a flame, and now I was afraid that I was being consumed by it. I couldn't ignore it any longer. The feelings I had tried so hard to bury, the way he made me feel seen, wanted, needed, those things were impossible to push aside. And yet, the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I had to lose. I had a family. I had a husband who loved me, who still believed in us. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing something inside me. Maybe it was the excitement of being wanted. Maybe it was the rush of something new, something I hadn't felt in years. But whatever it was, it had gotten under my skin, and I couldn't rid myself of it. That morning, as I made my way downstairs, I could hear my husband moving around in the kitchen. The sound of him making coffee, the clink of the mugs, the soft hum of the morning routine, it should have been comforting. It should have been familiar. But today, it felt like a reminder of everything that had changed. I had once loved this routine. I had once found solace in these quiet mornings, in the predictability of our life. But now, it felt like a cage. I took a deep breath before walking into the kitchen, trying to steady my nerves. My husband was standing by the counter, looking over the newspaper. He looked up when he heard me enter, his eyes softening with a smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice warm but tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Morning," I replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I could feel the tension between us, a quiet undercurrent that neither of us dared to address. He went back to his newspaper, and I busied myself with the coffee, trying to keep my hands from trembling. The silence stretched on, the weight of the unspoken words hanging heavily in the air. I could feel my husband's eyes on me, studying me, but I didn't meet his gaze. I couldn't. Not now. Not when everything was in flux. "You've been quiet lately," he said, his voice breaking through the silence. His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. I felt a pang of guilt in my chest, but I pushed it aside. I couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. "I've just been tired," I said quickly, my voice too sharp, too defensive. It was a lie, but it was the easiest answer. It was the one I had been giving for days. "Is that all?" he asked, his gaze steady. I could see the concern in his eyes, but there was something else there too. Something I couldn't quite place. Was it suspicion? Doubt? I didn't know, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew something wasn't right. That somehow, he could sense the distance between us, even though I had done my best to hide it. I nodded, trying to keep the conversation casual. "Yeah, just a little overwhelmed. Nothing to worry about." But I knew he wasn't convinced. He was silent for a moment, and I could feel him watching me, studying my every move. And for a moment, I wondered if he knew. If he had figured it out. If he could feel the shift in the air. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to confess everything, to let it all out. But the words wouldn't come. I couldn't say it. I couldn't tell him what I had done, what I was still feeling. Not when I knew it would destroy everything. I cleared my throat, trying to break the tension. "I'm just not feeling like myself lately," I said softly, my voice faltering. I hated how weak I sounded, how much I was lying to him, to myself. But it was all I could do. He nodded slowly, his expression softening. "We'll get through this," he said, his voice steady. But there was a quiet sadness in his eyes, one that I couldn't ignore. It was as if he knew, deep down, that something had changed, but he couldn't bring himself to ask. I smiled weakly, but it didn't reach my eyes. "Yeah," I said quietly. "We will." I turned away from him, unable to meet his gaze any longer. I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep up the facade of normalcy when everything inside me was falling apart. But I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to fix it. As I walked out of the kitchen, I could hear him behind me, moving around, getting ready for his day. But I couldn't stop the whirlwind of thoughts that was racing through my mind. I was trapped, caught between two worlds, and I had no idea how to choose between them. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison. A place filled with memories and lies, where the walls seemed to close in on me with every passing second. The life I had known was slipping away, and I didn't know how to hold on to it. I didn't know how to fix what I had broken. And worst of all, I didn't know how to live with the truth. It was late in the evening when I found myself standing at the window, staring out into the darkened garden. The cool air from the open window brushed against my skin, but it did nothing to quell the restlessness building inside me. The house was quiet now, my husband upstairs, his usual routine of retreating to his study or going to bed early. I, on the other hand, was wide awake, my thoughts racing uncontrollably. I hadn't been able to shake the guilt. It had settled in my chest like a heavy stone, suffocating me slowly with each passing day. And yet, despite the weight of it, despite the knowledge that everything was slipping away from me, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the feelings I had for him, the nephew. I turned away from the window and walked toward the living room. The familiar surroundings of my home, once comforting, now felt alien to me. I had spent so many years building this life, creating this image of stability, yet it was all beginning to unravel. The foundation I had stood on was no longer solid, and with each passing day, I felt more like a stranger in my own skin. I moved toward the couch, my thoughts still lingering on that kiss. The way it had felt, the moment I had crossed a line I never thought I would cross. What had happened between us wasn't supposed to happen. It was a mistake, a fleeting moment of weakness, yet the more I tried to push it away, the more it seemed to consume me. I wasn't sure if it was just a moment of madness or something deeper. All I knew was that I couldn't stop thinking about it. The house felt too small, the walls too close. I couldn't be alone with my thoughts any longer. I needed to escape, to get away from the suffocating reality I was trapped in. But where could I go? Who could I talk to? The only person I wanted to talk to was the one person I couldn't, him. I sat down on the couch, my mind swirling with conflicting emotions. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. I reached for it instinctively, and when I saw the name on the screen, I froze. It was a message from him. The weight of the phone in my hand felt unbearable, and I hesitated before opening it. What would I even say? I didn't have the answers to the questions swirling in my mind, let alone the right words to explain how I was feeling. The message lingered there, taunting me with its simplicity, yet it carried so much weight. I finally unlocked the phone, my fingers trembling as I typed out a response. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have." Before I could finish the message, my husband appeared in the doorway, his presence interrupting the moment. I quickly placed the phone down, my heart racing. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. He stood there, looking at me with a kind of weary concern that made my chest tighten. I had been trying so hard to keep everything normal, but the cracks were beginning to show. He could feel it. He had to. And for the first time, I realized that he wasn't just concerned about my well-being, he was concerned about something more. He knew. He knew that something was wrong, that something had shifted between us. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. How could I explain what I was feeling? How could I tell him that everything I had known, everything I had once believed to be true, was now shattered beyond repair? I'm fine, I said, the words coming out too quickly, too mechanically. I forced a smile, trying to make him believe it, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't buying it. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. You haven't been fine for days, he said gently. I know something's wrong. You don't have to hide it from me. The sincerity in his voice broke something inside me. The guilt hit me like a tidal wave, and for a moment, I was afraid I might drown in it. I opened my mouth again, but the truth wouldn't come out. It was too big, too complicated to be spoken aloud. I don't know what's happening, I whispered, the words barely audible. He reached out, placing a hand on my shoulder, his touch warm and familiar. We'll figure this out together, okay? Whatever it is, we can work through it. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. How could we work through this when I couldn't even understand it myself? How could I explain the way I had let myself fall into something I knew was wrong, something that would destroy everything? He didn't say anything else, but his presence was enough. He stayed with me, sitting beside me on the couch, and for a moment, the chaos inside me quieted. But I knew it wouldn't last. The storm inside was far from over, and I couldn't keep pretending it wasn't there. I needed to confront the truth. I needed to face what I had done, and yet, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to lose everything. Later that evening, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I looked so different, so distant from the woman I had once known. My face was pale, my eyes darkened with exhaustion, and there was a sadness in my expression that I couldn't hide. I had tried to bury it, tried to act like everything was normal, but it wasn't. I couldn't go on pretending. I knew I had to make a decision. I had to choose what kind of life I wanted to live, one where I remained with my husband, the man I had spent so many years with, or one where I gave in to the forbidden, where I let myself be consumed by the feelings I had for my nephew. The weight of the decision was unbearable. Every part of me screamed to turn away, to go back to the life I had known, but something inside me kept pushing me forward, pulling me toward him. I couldn't explain it, but the more I tried to fight it, the stronger the pull became. It was as if he had become a part of me, something I couldn't shake, no matter how much I tried. I closed my eyes, the confusion overwhelming me. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know how to fix this. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change, and soon. But for now, all I could do was wait. Wait for the storm to pass, or to grow stronger. And in the silence of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. The next few days felt like I was walking through a fog. Everything seemed out of focus, as if I were seeing the world through a haze of confusion and guilt. The house, once a familiar space, now felt foreign to me. Every corner, every room, seemed to remind me of the lie I was living. I couldn't look at my husband without feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me. Every time our eyes met, I felt like he could see right through me, that he could read the guilt in my expression. But he didn't ask questions. He didn't press me for answers. Instead, he simply kept going with his life, his routine, as if everything was normal. And it was that very normalcy that made everything worse. It was like living a double life, pretending to be someone I wasn't, while my mind and heart were torn in two different directions. I kept telling myself that I could fix it, that I could make it right. But the more I tried to push the thoughts of him, my nephew, out of my mind, the stronger the pull became. I couldn't ignore what had happened between us. It wasn't just the kiss, it was everything that had followed. It was the way I felt when he was near, the way his presence seemed to fill a void inside me that I hadn't even realized was there. And the worst part was, I didn't know how to stop it. I didn't know how to undo what had already been set in motion. I spent my days going through the motions, pretending to be the wife I used to be. But every time I touched my husband, every time I spoke to him, I felt like I was betraying him. It was a strange kind of paralysis, where I couldn't move forward, but I couldn't go back either. I had crossed a line, and now, I was trapped in the aftermath. It was a Thursday evening when I found myself alone in the house again. My husband had gone out for dinner with some colleagues, and I was left to my thoughts. I should have used the time to clear my head, to think things through. But instead, I found myself pacing the living room, my mind running in circles. I looked at the phone in my hand, the familiar screen glowing in the dim light. I had been avoiding it for days, avoiding any contact with him. But tonight, something inside me snapped. I unlocked the phone, my fingers moving almost automatically as I opened our messages. I had never meant to reach out like this, never meant to make things worse. But in that moment, I couldn't resist. The message was simple, just a few words, but it felt like a lifeline. "Are you okay?" he had asked. And just like that, everything came rushing back, the feelings, the confusion, the guilt. I wanted to ignore it, to move on with my life, but something inside me urged me to respond. I typed out a message, my fingers trembling. "I don't know," I wrote, my mind a jumble of conflicting emotions. "I don't know what to do." Before I could second-guess myself, I hit send. It was a cry for help, a plea for clarity, but I knew it wouldn't come. There was no easy solution to this. There was no way to undo what had already been done. The phone buzzed almost immediately with his reply. "We need to talk," it said. Just 3 words, but they hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't breathe. Part of me wanted to shut down the conversation, to walk away from it all, but another part of me felt compelled to respond. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity before I typed, "Okay." And just like that, the moment of reckoning had arrived. The conversation that followed was a blur of words and emotions, a mixture of confusion, regret, and unspoken desire. He admitted that he had been feeling the same way, that he couldn't ignore the connection between us. It was the first time either of us had acknowledged the elephant in the room. And it scared me. Because once the truth was out, there was no going back. We agreed to meet later that night, to talk in person. The anticipation was unbearable, and I couldn't stop my heart from racing. I knew this was the moment that would change everything. The moment I would have to decide what kind of person I wanted to be. I spent the next few hours pacing around the house, trying to prepare myself for what was coming. I knew I couldn't keep living this lie, but the thought of facing the consequences of my actions terrified me. What if my husband found out? What if everything fell apart? By the time evening came, I was a wreck. I barely had time to think before I was walking out the door, heading toward the place where everything would change. When I arrived, he was already waiting for me. His face was serious, his posture tense. But there was something else there too, something I couldn't quite place. Something that mirrored my own turmoil. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking. The silence was deafening. Finally, I broke the silence. "I don't know what to do anymore," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who I am anymore." He stepped closer to me, his eyes locked on mine. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," he said, his voice calm, but the tension in the air was palpable. "We'll figure it out together. But first, we need to talk about what happens next." I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "What happens next?" I asked, my voice shaking. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out and took my hand, his grip firm but gentle. "We need to decide," he said quietly, "whether we walk away from this, or if we face it, no matter the consequences." The words hung in the air like a weight, pressing down on me. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. all I knew was that whatever decision we made would change everything. And I wasn't sure I was ready for that. I pulled my hand away and stepped back, feeling the space between us widen, the distance growing. "I don't know if I can do this," I said, my voice breaking. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "We don't have to do anything right now," he said softly. "But we can't keep pretending that nothing is happening. Something's already changed, whether we admit it or not." I nodded, unable to speak. The decision was no longer in my hands. It had never been. The next few days were a blur. My husband's presence in the house, his gentle questions, his attempts to reach out, all felt like they belonged to a different world. I could feel the heavy silence between us growing, pushing us further apart. I wanted to talk to him, wanted to explain, to make everything right again, but every time I opened my mouth, the words felt stuck in my throat. The mornings were the hardest. I would wake up, knowing the routine would be the same cup of coffee, the same quiet moments of him getting ready for work. And yet, everything felt like it was falling apart. There was this aching void in me, an emptiness that I couldn't explain. I tried to fill it with tasks, with household chores, with anything that would distract me from the overwhelming guilt and confusion swirling inside. But nothing worked. Every time I closed my eyes, the memory of his touch, of the moments we had shared, flooded back, and I felt like I was drowning in it. I kept telling myself that I could fix it. I could go back to the way things were. But that wasn't true. The more I tried to hold on to the past, the more it slipped through my fingers. My life was no longer a simple equation of duty and responsibility. It had become something much more complicated, much more painful. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't know where I was going. I spent my evenings alone, pacing the house, waiting for something to happen, for the moment when everything would suddenly make sense. But it never did. I would sit by the window, staring out at the quiet street, wondering if anyone could see the turmoil inside me. Could my husband feel it? Did he sense the shift, the fracture in our relationship? He seemed so distant, yet so present, like a shadow hovering over everything I did. I couldn't escape him, even when he wasn't there. It was during one of these long, lonely evenings that I received another message from him. The one I had been both dreading and secretly waiting for. It wasn't a long message, just a few words, but they hit me like a wave crashing against the shore. "I think we need to talk." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The words seemed so simple, but they carried so much weight. It was time. I had known it was coming, but now that it was here, I felt paralyzed. What was I supposed to say? How was I supposed to explain what had happened? I had never felt so lost. I tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't find the right way to explain myself, to justify what I had done. How could I? How could I explain the inexplicable? The message blinked back at me, waiting for my reply. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. I knew that I had to face this, that I had to make a choice. But every part of me wanted to turn away, to pretend it hadn't happened, to retreat into the comfort of denial. But that wasn't an option anymore. I couldn't keep running from the truth. I grabbed my coat and left the house, not sure where I was going, but needing to get out of there, away from the house that had once felt like home. I walked aimlessly through the streets, the cold air biting at my skin, the darkness of the night mirroring the darkness inside me. My mind was racing, my thoughts tumbling over each other, until I found myself standing in front of the small park near our house. I had come here before, many times, when I needed to think, when I needed to clear my head. But tonight, it felt different. The park felt empty, the benches deserted, the trees standing in silence like sentinels in the night. It was as if everything around me was waiting for something to happen. Waiting for me to make a decision. I sat down on one of the benches, my hands shaking as I pulled my phone from my pocket. His message was still there, waiting for me. I hesitated before I typed my reply. "I'll meet you." The words were simple, but they were the only words I could say. I didn't know what would happen when I saw him. I didn't know what I would say or how I would feel. But I knew that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it wasn't. I pressed send, and then I sat there, staring at the phone in my hands. The world around me felt distant, like I was in a bubble, separated from everything and everyone. I was no longer sure of what I wanted, what I needed, or what I was willing to sacrifice. I had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. The only question left was whether I would face the consequences or continue to hide from them. The wind picked up, sending a chill through the air, but I didn't move. I stayed there, lost in thought, until the sound of footsteps reached my ears. I turned my head, and there he was. He was standing a few feet away, his posture tense, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jacket. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, neither of us moved. There was so much left unsaid between us, so much that neither of us was ready to confront. But we both knew it was time. He stepped closer, and I could see the hesitation in his movements. Neither of us spoke at first. We just stood there, facing each other, the air between us thick with tension. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said, his voice low but steady. "I had to," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "We can't keep pretending this isn't happening." He nodded, his eyes never leaving mine. "No, we can't." I swallowed hard, trying to steady my nerves. "What happens now?" I asked, the question hanging between us, unspoken but understood. He looked down for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I don't know," he said finally, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But we can't keep pretending like everything is fine. We have to face this." I nodded slowly, my heart heavy with the weight of his words. He was right. We couldn't keep pretending. The truth was out now, and there was no going back. "So, what now?" I asked, my voice breaking as I spoke. "What happens to us?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped closer, his hand reaching out toward me. For a moment, I thought he was going to pull me into his arms, but he stopped himself just inches from me. The space between us was palpable, but I could feel the pull, the undeniable attraction that had been building between us. "We take it one step at a time," he said softly. "We figure it out together." I didn't know what that meant, or where it would lead, but in that moment, I realized that whatever happened, whatever came next, there was no turning back. The silence between us in the park was almost unbearable. We stood there, just a few feet apart, the air thick with tension. His words echoed in my mind, "We take it one step at a time." It felt like an impossible promise. How could we possibly move forward when everything we'd known had been thrown into chaos? I wanted to speak, to say something, anything, to break the silence, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. What was I supposed to say? How could I explain what had happened between us, what was still happening? I didn't even understand it myself. He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself for what was to come. I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the same confusion I felt swirling inside me. We were both standing at the edge of something we couldn't yet define. I knew this moment would define us, would determine what path we would take, but I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to face the consequences of what had already happened. The minutes passed like hours. The city around us seemed distant, disconnected from the intensity of the moment. I could hear the distant hum of cars, the rustle of leaves in the trees, but it all felt so far away. My focus was entirely on him. On us. On what came next. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but steady. I'm not sure how we got here. How things got so complicated. But I know we can't keep pretending that nothing has changed. His words were a reminder of the truth that was so difficult to accept. I had crossed a line I couldn't uncross. And now, I had to deal with the fallout. But how could we move forward from this? Could we ever go back to the way things were? Could we even continue on the same path? I don't know how to fix this, I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. I had spent so long running from the truth, pretending everything was fine, but now that it was out in the open, I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. We can't fix it, he said quietly. Not the way you want us to. But we can try to make something new, something real. Something that makes sense for both of us. His words hit me like a shockwave. I hadn't expected him to say that. I had thought he would pull away, back off, as if nothing had ever happened. But instead, he was willing to face it. Willing to try, even if it meant diving into the unknown. I shook my head, unsure of what to feel. I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I don't know what I want. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against mine. The contact was simple, innocent even, but it felt electric. I didn't know how I could still be so drawn to him when everything was so wrong. But in that moment, I couldn't pull away. It was like I was being pulled into something I couldn't resist, something I didn't fully understand. We don't have to figure it all out right now, he said softly. But we can't keep pretending like nothing happened. We need to talk, really talk. No more hiding, no more running. I nodded, even though my heart was racing. He was right. We couldn't keep pretending. We couldn't keep living in this limbo. Something had to change, one way or another. We spent the next few hours walking through the park, talking in fragments, trying to piece together what had happened. But the more we talked, the more I realized how little we actually understood. We were both caught up in the aftermath of something that had started without warning, something we hadn't planned for or wanted. But now, it was a part of us. A part of everything. And no matter how much we tried to avoid it, no matter how many times we told ourselves that we could walk away, we couldn't. When the evening began to settle in, we found ourselves sitting on a bench in the park, the last remnants of daylight fading around us. I didn't know what the future held, didn't know where we were going, but in that moment, I felt a sense of clarity. It wasn't a solution, and it wasn't an answer, but it was a beginning. We had finally acknowledged what had happened, and for the first time in days, I felt like I could breathe. I don't know where we go from here, I said softly, looking down at my hands. But I know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep pretending everything is okay when it's not. He didn't answer right away. He just sat there beside me, his hand resting lightly on the bench, a few inches from mine. I could feel the weight of the unspoken words hanging in the air. Neither of us knew what would come next, but for the first time, it felt like we were facing it together. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. I can't promise everything will be easy. I can't promise I'll have all the answers. But I can promise that we'll figure it out. Together. We'll take it one step at a time. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that we could make it through this, that we could find a way to rebuild whatever it was we had lost. But I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to face the truth, to face the consequences of my actions. I don't know if I can do that, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can live with what I've done. He turned to look at me, his gaze steady. We all make mistakes, he said softly. But it's what we do after the mistake that matters. I nodded, but even as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be the same. That no matter what we tried, no matter how many steps we took, the weight of what had happened would always be there, lurking in the background. As the night stretched on, We said little more. We sat in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: things had changed. And there was no going back. The house felt like it was closing in on me, the walls pressing in with each passing moment. I couldn't breathe without feeling suffocated, couldn't move without the weight of my choices weighing down on me. It had been days since I last saw him, the nephew, and yet every moment felt like I was carrying him with me. His presence had become a constant shadow in my life, something I couldn't escape no matter how hard I tried. My husband hadn't said anything more about what had happened. He was trying to act like everything was normal, like we could just go on with our lives without addressing the elephant in the room. But I knew better. The silence was unbearable, and it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. I spent my days in a haze, moving through the motions of life without really living. The days blended together, a blur of routine and monotony. I woke up, made breakfast, cleaned the house, and did everything I could to keep my mind occupied. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't forget what had happened. I couldn't forget the way he had looked at me, the way he had made me feel. It was a feeling I couldn't shake, a sensation that had taken root deep inside me. Every time I looked at my husband, I felt the guilt gnawing at me, eating away at my insides. I couldn't pretend that everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. The space between us had grown wider, and no amount of silence could make it go away. He was still trying, still reaching out, but it felt like I was slipping further and further away from him. I knew I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep living this double life. The secret was eating me alive, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep it hidden. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. That afternoon, as I sat in the living room, my mind racing with thoughts, I heard a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound startled me. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of who it could be, before I slowly stood up and walked to the door. When I opened it, I froze. There he was. The nephew. Standing in the doorway, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my heart skip a beat. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know what to say. I had told myself I wouldn't see him again, that I had to move on from this madness, but here he was, standing in front of me like a living reminder of everything I had tried to escape. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly, his voice soft but firm. I opened my mouth to say something, but no words came out. I was frozen, caught in the intensity of the moment. All I could do was nod, stepping aside to let him in. He walked in without hesitation, his presence filling the room like a storm, overwhelming everything. I could feel the tension between us, the unspoken words, the things neither of us wanted to say. The house, which had once felt so familiar, now felt strange, as though we were no longer in the same place. The walls seemed to close in around us, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. He stood by the door for a moment, not saying anything, just looking at me. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the same uncertainty I felt. We had crossed a line, and now there was no going back. The silence between us stretched out, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't know what to do," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to fix this. But I can't pretend like nothing happened." His words were like a knife, cutting through the air between us. I felt the weight of the truth settle on my shoulders, heavier than anything I had ever felt before. I had known it would come to this. I had known that we couldn't keep pretending, but hearing it out loud made it all the more real. "I don't know how to fix it either," I said quietly, my voice shaky. "I don't know what to do anymore." He stepped closer, his presence like a magnet, pulling me in. I wanted to pull away, to retreat, but I couldn't. There was nowhere to go. We were trapped in this moment, and there was no escaping it. "We can't keep pretending like everything is fine," he said, his voice more urgent now. We have to face it. We have to face what's between us. I closed my eyes, the guilt threatening to suffocate me. I had never wanted this. I had never asked for any of this. But here we were, standing at the edge of something I wasn't sure I could handle. I don't know what to do, I repeated, my voice breaking. I don't know how to fix this. He reached out, his hand brushing against mine, and I flinched, the contact sending a shock through me. I didn't know what I wanted anymore. Part of me wanted to run, to hide, to pretend this never happened. But another part of me, the part that was slowly unraveling, wanted to take a step closer, to give in to the feelings I had tried so hard to suppress. We don't have to fix it right now, he said, his voice softer now. But we can't keep living like this. We can't keep pretending that nothing's changed. I nodded, unable to say anything. I didn't know what to say. There were no words that could fix what had happened. There were no words that could undo the damage I had done, the trust one had broken. I'll leave, he said suddenly, his voice cold now. But we need to talk. We need to figure this out. I stood there, watching him turn and walk toward the door. I wanted to say something, to stop him, to beg him to stay, but I didn't. I couldn't. I watched him leave, the sound of the door closing behind him echoing in the silence. And just like that, I was alone again. But this time, it was different. This time, I was truly alone, trapped in the weight of my choices. The silence in the house felt suffocating, the emptiness unbearable. I had crossed a line, and now I had to face the consequences. The truth was, there was no going back.